Chapter 11, Dangerous Crossing. It was the middle of August when the Abbotts made camp along the Snake River, getting ready to cross. That was the day Sam finally understood why his parents had been arguing. He and Lizzie had gone to collect kindling near the river. They were walking back to the wagons when Ma's voice came drifting over the tall grass. "It's not worth a day or two. It's not worth 100 more days on the trail if we lose you, William." Lizzie motioned for Sam to stay low, and they crouched to listen. Ranger saw a dragonfly and started to jump at it, but Sam grabbed him around the neck and pulled him close. "Shh! Quiet, dog. This is a man's decision. I've set my mind to crossing in the morning." Ma's voice came back just as strong. "It's a foolish man's decision. This crossing is treacherous. The number of men who have drowned." Sam didn't hear what she said next because Lizzie let out a great sneeze, and the conversation by the wagon either ended or became so hushed that they couldn't hear any more. "Come on," Lizzie gathered up the sticks and dry weeds she'd set on the ground. "We'd best get this back for the fire." "Do you think we'll cross?" Sam whispered as they started back toward the wagons. Lizzie shrugged. "It's Pa's choice," she said. "He seems set on doing it." "What if it's dangerous?" Sam's voice was full of worry. Ranger trotted closer and nudged his hand. "Everything's dangerous out here," Lizzie said, "but we'll be fine. Ma frets too much." In the morning, Pa paid some Shoshone men to ferry the wagons to the other side of the river. That's how Ma, Lizzie, Sam, Amelia, Baby Isaac, and Ranger crossed too. They were on the far side of the river when Pa and the other men mounted their horses to drive the livestock across. Ma stood in the mud at the edge of the river. She could hear her whispering prayers. Three Island Crossing was named for the three islands in the middle of the Snake River. Travelers used 2 of those islands to get across. The guidebook said getting from shore to the first island wasn't too difficult. And crossing from the first island to the second wasn't bad either. The last crossing from the second island to shore was the longest and hardest, 300 yards with a mean, fast current. Sam wasn't sure if it was last night's rain or the fact that his father had to cross soon that made the river look so swollen and fast and hungry today. "Here they come," Lizzie said, squinting across the river. Dr. Loring and a couple of the men from Missouri came first, driving their cattle in front of them. They crossed to the first island and then to the second, just as the guidebooks directed. Their cattle were mostly across the last stretch from the second island to shore when Dr. Loring's horse reared up. "Oh, no." Ma sucked in her breath, and they all watched as Dr. Loring clung to the reins, squeezing his saddle with his knees, trying to stay on. Sam couldn't tell what had happened to his horse, whether it stepped in a hole or got spooked by something in the water, but somehow Dr. Loring managed to settle it down and get it moving again. When the horse climbed up the bank next to them and shook itself off, Ma let out a deep breath, but then she tensed right back up again. "Pa and Mr. Harrigan are starting out now." Lizzie pointed to the far shore. Sam watched as they urged the cattle into the river and began to follow on their horses. Mr. Harrigan's horse Bess trotted right into the water, but old Nugget, Pa's horse, took a few steps and paused, pawing at the river, making great splashes as if this were all a game. It made Sam feel better that the horses seemed to like the river. The water wasn't deep, only just past their knees, at least for now. Sam reached into his pocket and held the quilt squares tight as Pa and Mr. Harrigan drove the cattle across to the first island. Nugget climbed up onto the shore and shook himself. "That wasn't so bad." Lizzie had gone over to stand by Ma. "One down, 2 to go," Ma whispered. Her hands were clenched so tightly at her chin that her fingers were white. The second part of the crossing went smoothly until the very end, when a gust of wind blew Pa's hat off his head. Mr. Harrigan leaned over to reach for it, but between the wind and the current it was carried out of sight in seconds. Sam wondered what would happen to someone who fell into that water, but he didn't say so aloud. Ma was already humming faster than a bumblebee. On the second island, Pa and Mr. Harrigan brought their horses close together. Ma paced back and forth. Dr. Loring came up, still all soggy from the river, and put a hand on her shoulder. "They're going to be just fine, Mary. They were watching right close when I crossed. They'll stay clear of all that trouble spot. I'm sure that's what they're talking about now." "I hope you're right." Ma's voice sounded thankful but shaky. When Dr. Loring lifted to see to his cattle, Ranger came to stand by her. "I suppose you're looking for bacon," she said, hands on her hips. "Well, dog, if they come through this safe and sound, you can have a whole slab of it. How's that?" Ranger licked Ma's hand. Bacon was good, but mostly he wanted Pa and Mr. Harrigan to come so everyone would stop feeling so sad and edgy. Ranger hated that prickly neck hair feeling. It was everywhere now, in the dust and the wind and the water. Danger.